Hello and welcome to another episode of Tell Great Stories, the podcast that looks back at some of Unbound Theatre's past projects and productions. I'm Lara Pipistrelle and we're looking at two of our past pantomimes, Alice in Wonderland and Pinocchio. And with us today are...
Hello, I'm Dario Knight. I was the writer of both shows and the director of Pinocchio.
Hi, I'm Emily. I played Alice in Alice in Wonderland, and in Pinocchio I played Mudlark and Broccoli.
Hello, I'm Matt, and I played Tweedledee and Pinocchio.
Oh, hello, I'm Chris, and in Alice I was the King of Hearts, and then when we did Pinocchio I played the role of Geppetto.
Lovely, thank you for joining me. Before we look at the two shows, I just wanted to ask a general panto question. What was each of your first experiences of watching a pantomime, and what was your first experience working on one?
Well, Alice was my first experience working on a pantomime, which I sort of fell into by accident. So I'd just started attending the drama lessons at the Queen's Park, and the director of Alice in Wonderland was like, "Someone's dropped out. Would you like to join in?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll join in." And he's like, "There's 2 roles up." And I'm like, "Cool." La la la. Walked into the rehearsal and he was like, "Oh, this is Emily. She's going to be playing Alice." And for a moment I went, Alice in Wonderland. And I rolled with it and it was great and I never left. So Alice was my first experience in a pantomime.
Wow.
For me, I don't remember myself as a family going to see pantomimes. I'm sure we did, but I guess I'm just too old and can't remember anymore. But I used to be quite involved with another local theatre in this area called Tring, and for many years I sort of worked backstage on their pantomimes, starting off working as one of the sort of stage hands, moving stuff around. And then I became stage manager for a set of 4 pantomimes, and Tring at that time used to have a tradition of doing pantomimes almost it was alphabetical order. It was Aladdin, Cinderella, Dick Whittington, Jack and the Beanstalk, and then 4 years later start back at Aladdin, because the theory was that most young people would have seen the 4 and have had enough of pantomimes. So that was all my experience of pantomimes, a lot of moving furniture around, building sets, etc. And then took a break from pantomimes until one came along at Queen's Park that I went along and auditioned for and got cast, and haven't looked back since.
And what was that first one you auditioned for?
Well, I did the one we did before Unbound, which was a Dick Whittington pantomime, but that wasn't an Unbound version. Then the following year, the first one was... I'm confused now. What was the first one, Dario?
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty, it was Beauty, yes. I thought it was, but yes, first one was Beauty.
I can honestly say that I have actually, until I started at Unbound, I had never been to a pantomime. It's got a lot to do with being foreign. I'm South African by birth, and weirdly, it's just not a thing. It does happen, but it's not the big tradition with a panto in every village like it is here. So the first time I got involved in panto was when I auditioned for Alice in Wonderland, which was interesting. It was quite an introduction to the madness that is panto.
See, I had, as a young child, I had seen pantos, and I had been to a few. My grandparents, my Nana and Deo, would take me because my dad couldn't sit still. So I didn't have many theatre experiences with my parents, but with my Nana and Deo I did. And it was a really special thing for us to go because for them it was quite a lot of money. So the one theatre experience we did have was panto. So I remember watching Peter Pan and just going, wow, this is so cool. And, there is that real, as a child, that magic that you have as a child. And panto really really gets that. Please cut that bit out. And it's such a wonderful thing to have a magical time of the year, a magical experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Okay, so Dario, I mean, Alice has obviously been quite formative for many of the cast members, their first experience of panto. But it's an iconic story in its own right that many people have read and seen. How did you go about adapting such a recognisable and kind of popular tale?
The main thing is to try as best you can to ignore the iconography of it. So stay away from Disney films is always a good start. I mean, that's easier said than done to ignore the kind of iconic status of it. But if you imagine a copyright lawyer standing over your shoulder as you write it, then inspiration soon strikes. I mean, with Alice, I went away and read both of the books and then tried to extrapolate some bits and pieces that I thought were maybe not as often mentioned, like the character of the Duchess, who's the perfect dame because she's a monster in the book, and you don't often see her in some of the film adaptations. That chapter doesn't always find its way into things, sort of when telly shows do a special about Alice in Wonderland. The Duchess and the Pig and the Pepper's never really there. And then there's a reference to the Mad Hatter. I think it's in the first book. Having attended one of the Queen of Hearts concerts, and his singing was so bad that he murdered time, which kind of became the heart of our version. That was the plot revolved around the great clock of Wonderland having been broken, and Alice has to help find out who broke it and put it back together again. So finding something new to bring to it is important, really, and once you've kind of found that, and it's even better if you can find something that is actually in the book but people don't tend to think of. Once you've got that, you can then build your story around it, your version of it, and you can put in all the characters that people expect to see, like the Cheshire Cat and the White Rabbit. So yeah, the key with Alice, I think, was to try and make it into a single narrative rather than an episodic one, which is what happens in the book. It's a series of vignettes, really. It's almost like a series of sketches, and the characters don't tend to recur. I think they all sort of appear at the end of the first book for the trial. But with a panto, you don't want to have to sort of meet the dame and then not meet her again until the end of the play. You need the characters to come and go all the way through. So it was about trying to find a plot where all of your characters, like the caterpillar and the Cheshire Cat and the White Rabbit, could recur throughout the whole story rather than just in their own little sealed off section.
Derek, I was just going to ask, because I'm bemused now. Obviously, Lewis Carroll's book is well known. You say a second book. What is the second one?
Yeah, so there's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is the original, and there's Alice Through the Looking Glass is the second book.
Oh,
and that's
right.
where
Yes, I'm with you now.
Tweedledee and Tweedledum and the Jabberwock all come from.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I'm with you.
Okay, so I think Alice also had quite a big emphasis on audience interaction. So what were your favourite experiences of working with an audience, and what are your top tips to performers just starting out doing this kind of theatre? That's like a question for everyone.
I think the first thing I do is interact with the audience playing Alice. The first thing she does is go down those stairs and interact. And I remember being completely terrified, because I was like, I've never done this before. I've never done panto. I've never interacted. I can't control what comes out of the audience's mouth. And I remember being really like, oh, but as we went along, I was like, this isn't far off working in a school. Like, they will say things to me and I just have to say stuff back. And that's normal life, really. And it's just about having some slight control. I do remember, I think it was a few shows in, Alice starts off saying she's bored and like tromping down the stairs. And I asked someone what they were doing, and they went, well, I'm waiting for you to get on stage. And I was like, well, that's all right. I've got 5 more steps. I'll be there in a minute. Like, as I went along, and I remember saying it without thinking and then going, oh, there we go. There's my first grumpy person I've dealt with, which isn't too hard when you're playing Alice, who's already quite grumpy. But it didn't take long to fall in love with it, because you're so there in with the audience. And when you really remember what it's like to watch a panto, you kind of get that whole, oh yes, that's the bit they love as well, and you really vibe off them as well. So that really helps you perform, even if it is at times a little scary and a little like, oh, you then find the absolute fun in that, which is, it's just always good.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly, I mean, my experience of audience interaction is years of street theatre, which goes a long way towards preparing you. But you pick up all sorts of tips, like it a lot of it is really remembering that you have the power, because most people are absolutely terrified of being singled out and up in front of other people. And when you assemble them all, assemble a crowd of several hundred people all together, nobody wants to stand out. Nobody wants to be singled out, and people become very predictable. That's why when you tell a group of people to clap, they will almost 90% of the time they'll just do it. People become very compliant, so you can prepare in advance for about 90% of the situations you're going to face, and the other 10% is just playing with it. And you get to see, somebody will come up with something, and you 9 times out of 10 you just go, "That's very funny. Wish I'd thought of that. Carrying on with the script, thanks."
Yeah. I think a lot of audience members probably don't twig, or certainly shouldn't twig if you're doing it properly, the extent to which audience interaction in a pantomime that might feel spontaneous or improvised actually aren't really. Things like the ghost routine, the "it's behind you" routine, or the call and response of the "oh no it is, oh yes it isn't," or the other way around. Those are very formulaic to the point where you script them, and performers, as you say, Matt, you kind of direct the audience so that they are, whilst feeling that they're shouting out being spontaneous, actually they're following the script that you've planned. So improv isn't really the sort of the motor behind a pantomime. It's kind of the life jacket. It's there in the event of an emergency, but actually if it all goes well, you don't really need to improvise anything. So I mean, even you, Chris, having played Dame a couple of times, there's always that bit of chatting to the man in the front, the poor man in the front row who becomes your love interest for 2 hours. Obviously there's a bit of, you don't know quite what he's going to say, but you have a set of prepared questions that you know you're going to ask, and having done it a few times, you've got to must have a set of responses that you can pull out for. Certainly the jobs, I know, is one of your specialities.
I mean, one of the things I always look for as well is someone that's normally got a bit of a loud shirt or a loud jumper, because they're obviously an open character to start with, especially if they're with their family as well, because that means they've probably come along to have a laugh, and if they can have a laugh in front of their children, that makes them look even better. I mean, Christmas around the corner, he's now a lovely dad. So that's always a good target to pick on, and especially if someone backstage knows someone out the front that's likely to be good. But I mean, you wouldn't pick on someone who is going to try and come back at you, because then it can kill it, and they would want to take over the show, which is not what you want. So again, you have to sort of find that sort of person and not go to them. I mean, because obviously with Alice, I was playing the King of Hearts, and his first entrance was down for the rake as well. And I played it, and Dad let me go of it pretty much as a sort of bumbling old fool, because that's how it was. The Queen of Hearts was in charge, and he was just a sort of daft old sidekick. So I could just bumble along the whole time anyway, and which is quite good, because when you forget a line, you can just sort of sit there and go blah, 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 until you remember what you got to say. So
5 years later, the secrets come out.
I think there's all those bits, and especially when you've got to pick, because the other moment that always happens in panto when you pick on someone is the inevitable birthday scene, where for reasons best known to ourselves, we need to have a scene in front of the curtains. And a lot of that again is just it's in many ways it's easier to pick on someone who's got a group of friends around them, because they add the peer pressure, but on the other side, you do sometimes. Somebody says, "Well, you get a note backstage that goes, it's somebody's birthday. Can you ask for Kieran?"
Yeah, we get requests.
And Kieran is 3 years old, stands there, and you can't interact with him, and it's just difficult, and you're trying everything you've prepared, and nothing works. I just kind of learn it happens. Part of the joy of interactions is that yes, you can prepare, but you do sometimes just have to draw a line under it and send them back up and let it go.
I think we're really lucky with the space we have. Like when you're on stage, you are not that far from an audience member. You're really not. And like there are times like I remember doing something in front of the class, and it was the bit where I think it is one of my favourite moments of an audience member was I'm saying my name because I think Gareth was trying to guess it, and I was like, "It's Alice, Alice," and a guy in the front row, literally a foot away from me, went, "Who the?" And I was like, "Don't you dare!" But you could do that because all it required was me to turn my body and look him in the eye, and it was just such a really nice moment because you're literally next to them at some point. And I think at one point Rebecca and I literally just sat in the audience as we watched the ballet. I think that was Alice. Yeah, that was Alice. So you have that joy of literally pretty much being with them and you can see them, which I think for some people is really scary, but also you can see them really enjoying themselves and you're like, oh, this is great. You get like immediate feedback for what you're doing. You're like, they are having fun. I'm having fun. It's fun.
I mean, actually, you're saying that, but the interaction with the audience. I mean, Dario, do you specifically write or think when you're doing writing where entrances can come through the audience? Because obviously with Queen's Park, we have got that option of coming down the steps for the audience, which is always a good one, isn't it? I mean, is that something you intentionally put in?
Yeah, I mean, you try and make sure it happens a couple of times, partly because it's nice, as Emily was saying, the theatre is so small, it's nice that even if you're in the back row, you can still be part of it and feel like you're in the middle of it. Those sort of entrances are really handy for if you have got to try and pull focus. It's a bit of misdirection away from the stage, often if you're doing a scene change or something. So they can be very handy for that. Or if you have got to go to a front cloth, which is not necessarily the most exciting thing to look at. If you've got people in the audience, that's good fun. And it's a great way to start the show, actually, because even though we do it most years, people do get slightly caught unawares, but very excited when the show starts by someone running down the rake, sort of getting ready for the show. It adds a bit of excitement to the beginning. So it's it's something we always try and do deliberately, just because I think it's just really fun, and people don't always expect it. And as I say, even the people who might be thinking they've got the duff seats at the back, still suddenly they're involved, and there's someone chatting to them at the back. It's really nice.
If it's good enough for the Lion King, Dario, it's good enough for us.
Oh yes. I think Alice in Wonderland has got one of my favourite, as my two favourite panto heckles. One of them's from Alice in Wonderland, and it was when the Jabberwock came out, because the subplot of the story is the Queen of Hearts summons the Jabberwock to try and destroy the king and all the other characters, and possibly because we were supposed to have a scary Jabberwock, and we decided to go against that in the end. So it was quite a cute puppet that we had.
So cute.
So the audience weren't particularly scared of it, and on one night, totally unprompted, no one set this up. All the kids in the audience started shouting in unison, "Eat the Queen! Eat the Queen!" And there was a sort of a moment of just all of them kind of dumbfounded, going, "Oh, where did that come from?"
Should have made a scarier Jabberwock.
Yeah, it was meant to be a sort of massive. It's a bit like the crocodile in Peter Pan. You want it to be scary because it's the thing even the villain's frightened of it. But we ended up with a cute one, and it was a very good puppet, I have to say. I ended up doing a tap dance, I think. At one point.
Yeah.
Because there were half a dozen dancers hidden underneath as a sort of Chinese dragon. But yeah, all the kids started shouting. My favourite one ever was the year before we did Beauty and the Beast, and that starts with a stable boy as the kind of Buttons character finding a horse that's run away from the Beast's castle, and he's got to hide it. And as a way of warming up the audience, you tend to do some very quick fire jokes. So there are about 6 or 7 horse puns in a row, just to kind of get the audience warmed up. And during the run, this got extended to about 12 or 13 horse puns. And one night near the end of the run, there was a young lad who was sat on the gantry at the side of the theatre, and in a moment of silence, never leave a pause in pantomime, it's deadly, but in a moment's silence, this kid just said, in the most deadpan voice ever, "Stop doing horse puns, they're not funny." To be fair, he had a point, but that's my favourite heckle ever, because how on earth do you come back at that one?
Well, in Alice in Wonderland, I was still working at a school, and some of the kids had actually come to see us, and some of the staff members. And there's a bit where I go to kiss the Gareth's character, the knave, yeah. And like as I go to do it, one of my kids jumps up because it's very bizarre to see your teaching assistant suddenly doing something else and doing something a bit weird. And like they jumped up and there was this noise and I was like, right, I need to fall asleep now. Because normally I'd get a bit close and then fall asleep. But this time I think I'd like leant slightly, saw them jump up and just dropped. And I think poor Gareth was like, oh, that was quick. Because normally it's like a yawn and then I go. Whereas this time I was like, ah.
Oh, all fun and games. I think that kind of is the underscore of what it's all about. Moving on to a slightly sort of different view of everything. Emily, you played Alice in the illustrated audiobook of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, as well as in the panto version. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between like the original depiction of the character and the panto version of the character, and how you kind of felt playing both of them?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about literature, especially classic literature, is that it's read by so many people and it's approached by so many people with their own perceptions that the way we interact with literature is our own. So having two separate Alices is actually quite an easy thing to do, because the way I would read Alice in the classic book is very different to how someone would interpret it anyway. But also there was dramatic differences, even just down to the costume, because in the panto Alice, I was wearing Christine's new rock boots, I think they were, but they were chunky and like had a really like, there was a slight edginess to it, and she was one of her character traits, generally we all agree, is that she's a little bit bratty. But Panto Alice just took it really far, and that's really fun because I went in with a really clear character as to who the Alice was supposed to be in that panto. So you're not approaching it with going, oh, what shall I do? You're like, that's what writers are for. We are blessed with them. They tell us, they give us enough that we can then play with it, of course. But it's even things like the voices were different. So when I just did the audiobook version, Alice was very classically talked like this, and there was White Rabbit, and at no point did I go White Rabbit with mine in the panto. So it is fascinating that we're able to do that with one character, that in two different things it's very different, and I love that, and I think that's really cool.
That sounds like you've got some really lovely memories to enjoy there. Yeah, and speaking of which, I guess the question to everyone would be, what's your abiding memory of the Alice in Wonderland run?
Getting stuck in the first rabbit hole.
Oh God, yeah.
Weirdly, I've got that rabbit hole stayed with all of us. Just the fact that it changed from being...
Was that the one made out of a bin?
Yeah,
well, I
so
think
that was the first one. There was 3 in total.
There were...
Yeah, it was going to be a bin, and then it was going to be a piece of... then it was... I think it eventually ended up just being a sign that said rabbit hole this way.
Yeah.
That was the point at which I intervened, yeah.
Yeah, I remember looking at the bin and going, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. And I was a lot skinnier back then. And I watched Jess, who played the White Rabbit, go first, and she's physically embodied a lot smaller than me, and she struggled, and I went, I'm really not sure. But... you know, you still do it anyway. And I remember getting through and going, oh, this is all right. And then my hips hit the middle of the bin, and that was it. And all I could remember was going, at least I'm not in a dress. At least this isn't the dress run. At least I'm not in a dress. But it required, like, I'm pretty sure I blocked it out my memory, because there definitely was some wiggling going on, and there was definitely some movement that had to happen, but I just don't remember how I got out of it. But I remember getting stuck in it. And then the next week we came back and there was a different rabbit hole, and I was like, cool. The hole looked bigger, so I was like, that's fine. But there was like a ridge at the bottom, so you had to get your leg over as you ducked and crawled in. So that didn't work. I don't think I ever even made it in. And that's when I remember Dario going, we can just put a sign up. And I remember just being like, oh, thank God. Because I think for me, it was like...
rabbit hole this way, I think.
Yeah. I was like, I really don't want to be difficult. This is my first ever thing with everyone. I don't want to be difficult, but I can't get through these rabbit holes.
Some creative problem solving there.
I have to say, my memory of Alice was when we were doing the courtroom scene that I got kissed by a bearded man every night. Which, when I said to people, it's not the greatest experience to get kissed by a man with a beard. When someone said to me, "What, you've been kissed by a man? It's just a beard that puts you off." I said, "No, you misunderstand me. The whole thing of being kissed by a man with a beard is just not a good thing, especially when it's Alice there."
I think
He left
also,
half his makeup on you, didn't he?
yeah. But we also had loads of fun backstage as well because of the slapstick scene. That was quite a long scene, and I think one of the times there was this massive game of Uno because there were only 3 people on stage, and there was like. And it was a pretty big cast, Alice in Wonderland, and we were all in this massive circle playing Uno. And there was like, I think it was you, Chris, that brought these things in because there was like an Uno thing that spat out cards. There was like, we had like so many layers to this game of Uno that we just did backstage. And I just remember feeling like really close with everyone, which is a wonderful thing. And yeah, that games of Uno backstage during the slapstick, because you could pretty much go, right, I'm off stage for a good while now. That's fine.
I remember Louis, the technician, used to, when it got to that bit, came downstairs with a pillow and used to have a lie down in the corridor.
Yeah.
Went on so long.
Well, I had to go on stage after it, and I think that is the smelliest slapstick we've ever done. Because there was
all sorts in that one, wasn't there?
I remember going on stage once, and I remember nearly like heaving because I was like, oh God, no. And just being terrified because I was like, oh no, but. And I can't remember what my line was, but it definitely was at odds with the smell. And I think it was something like, oh look, there's loads of food in here. And I just remember being like, oh, because obviously it was like a mess. But you know, everyone sort of enjoyed it. But I just remember going on stage and being like, what has happened? And I think that was the one they used a can of chili, and I was like, we're not doing that again. We cannot have that can of chili.
Under the hot lights.
Yeah, there was so
in the days before LEDs.
Yeah, there was just so much went on and in and on and off stage. I mean, apart from as an introduction to panto, it was wild.
Yes.
Because it started off with, okay, here's some people in funny costumes, and I'll be part of a double act with John, who was absolutely fantastic. And then there's just things flying everywhere, and then we're trying to get a mushroom on stage, and then off the world's biggest mushroom for one scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was about 6 or 8 feet wide, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
The best bit was we got the mushroom on stage, but we didn't get the caterpillar on stage every time, did we?
that is my favourite memory of is Doherty the Matterpillar.
With his lines cunningly hidden inside the mushroom.
Yeah, we found it as we were striking it on the last night. He'd hidden them.
It's the little tail as he ran down the corridor. It's just this little swish of a tail as it went along.
Well, I remember sitting in the rehearsal in the dressing room, which I used to do a lot, and there was usually only me and him in there because everyone was either on stage or attempting to move the scenery. And we were sat there one night, and I was sort of quite zoned out, but we had that speaker in the corner that does the show relay, so you know roughly where we are in the show. And he was sat there reading a paper, which was funny because he had all his extra arms linked together as caterpillar. So every time he turned a page, there was sort of 8 arms moving the paper. And we were sat there in silence, and I suddenly sort of twigged something, and I went, "Wasn't that your cue?" And he slowly lowered the newspaper and listened to what was going on the speaker, and then just shouted at the top of his voice, "Fuck!" And then, you might have to bleep that. And then sort of threw down the paper, put on this like headdress thing he had, which had his antennae on, and then ran down the corridor. But as you said, his costume was a bit like a sleeping bag, so he couldn't really run. He just had to shuffle really quickly, and all the little arms were pumping as he went up there. And I was on the floor. I was laughing my head off, and but he was determined to go on. And I think people like Gareth were in the corridor going, "Don't worry about it," because the running joke was he's always late for his scene. So whatever happens, whether it's the ballet or the cooking scene, he arrives 2 minutes later, dressed for that scene, and he's late. And so Gareth's going, "Don't worry about it, no one will know." And he's going, "No, I'm going on. At which point, it was a different scene. We'd moved on. Everyone just kind of assumed he wasn't turning up and moved on with it. He then bursts onto the stage, and I think just says something like, "Hello, am I late?" And everyone sort of looks at him slightly awkwardly, and I don't know who was on, but someone kind of went, "Yes," and he went, "Okay, bye," and then left. And then came back to the corridor, back to the dressing room, took off his little hat and his gloves, put them on the table, and just said to me, "No one noticed."
He was so loved, though, by the audience. He was so adored by them.
He was. They used to cheer when he went on.
And I think, and also by the cast as well, because I think at some points you really felt a bit like a dysfunctional family. Like, there was so much closeness and so much chaos and just so much fun, and don't get me wrong, occasionally stress. So you really bond through chaos and stress. There is something to be said about that you did just feel, a bit like a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
Well, in the 3 months of preparation and the 3 weeks of living together, you spend more time with these people than you do with your family anyway. So
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, and even after all that, we all came back and did it for more years after that.
Yeah.
We all returned. Coming back, next year for Pinocchio. It's another one of those stories that's not traditional. So I guess, Dario, what led you to choose it as the next panto? And, why has Unbound favoured these kind of atypical stories to adapt into pantomime over the years?
I think because they are atypical. It's the field of flowers fewer people have picked.
Yeah.
So those stories just seem more exciting, really. Having said that, we've just announced Sleeping Beauties this year. But those ones are exciting because you can find a new way of telling them. You don't just have to go over the same old version of it. But yeah, for the most part, we do stories that you wouldn't often associate with pantomime. But I think it gives Unbound and Queen's Park a USP, really. And I think it's good for audiences too. Aylesbury's, lucky. It's got 2 theatres of very different sizes. And I think by avoiding the types of stories that a big commercial theatre would tackle for their pantomime, we're giving people the chance to see 2 shows a year, and 2 completely different shows as well, done in very different ways, which I think is great for audiences. And lots of people that come to see us have also gone to see the big one, and they enjoy the fact that they can go and see a huge one with people they've seen off the telly, and there's pop songs, and there's pyrotechnics and huge bits of scenery, and it's that sort of spectacle. And then you can come to a Queen's Park one where you feel a lot more involved and it's a lot more intimate. So it's nice to make sure that there is that balance. In terms of why Pinocchio, for a long time in the Queen's Park office we had The List, which was this document, and it had a long list of show titles, which were fairy tales or folk tales or classic children's stories, and they were all basically the potential pantomimes. And every year we'd go back to the list and look through it and think which one leaps out. So Pinocchio was on there. All of the ones that I may have done were on there, and Pinocchio included. And a bit like Alice, really. I went away, I read the book again, and there are a couple of images rather than plot lines that stuck out. There's Toyland, which is in the book. Although in the book it's more of it's a place where people play games all day and nobody works, whereas we did the sort of toys come to life Toyland. And then there's another sequence where Pinocchio gets sold to a circus. And I kind of thought between Toyland and circus, that's 2 really strong visuals that you can start a story from. And there's a lot of characters you can build on there, especially with toys. So we had a clockwork soldier and a ballerina and a teddy bear and puppets, obviously. And it sort of built up from there, really. And then, really, as with Alice, you're putting together a plot that can use the basics from the original, and then you bring in the characters you expect to see, whether they're the panto archetypes like the Dame, and the characters like Geppetto and Fox and Cat can also come in. So you're mixing what you expect from a panto and what you expect from the story. Because again, Pinocchio is very episodic. It is again a series of little vignettes rather than a long story. So it was about finding a plot line that ties it all together.
Nice. I guess, we mentioned puppets and bringing everything in together. So, Matt, your role was particularly demanding given the amount of puppetry involved. It was entirely puppet-based. Can you tell us a bit about the Pinocchio puppet and your kind of experiences bringing him to life?
Well, yeah. I was actually really, Pinocchio wasn't on stage. I think one of the things about most of the pantos, I think, is that everyone gets a fair crack of time on stage, and he only actually enters quite late. But yeah, I've always been interested in puppetry in the same way that I'm interested in things like mime, masks, juggling, object manipulation. It's all about, the slightly weirder sides of theatre. But nothing quite prepares you for when you actually have to put this thing on your arm and bring it to life. We've all played with it's not a sock puppet. He's got an arm. His mouth moves differently. We were quite fortunate that there were a couple of cast members who'd been in a production of Avenue Q previously, so I got some very useful but admittedly second-hand advice. Things like you have to move his mouth with your thumb. It's not just opening and closing your whole hand. You're specifically opening his lower jaw with your thumb. And little things like, because I'm on stage with the puppet on my arm, and where I look, he has to look. And it's not the same as just I turn 45 degrees, his head turns 45 degrees. We've both got to be looking from slightly different angles. So I started with ping pong balls, drawing eyes on them and holding them on my hand, and then set up a camera, because you can't do this in the mirror, because you've got to have some kind of perspective and be able to see what's going on. So yeah, many a long evening, and if anyone looked in at me standing in front of my TV with a camera, with a couple of ping pong balls on my hand, looking around from left to right, but it was surprisingly hard work. But I think as you get through, there's a moment where you feel you've got it. You start expressing yourself through this other character. You start inhabiting two beings. I like to think that by the time we actually went on stage, it was actually profoundly weird when we finally got to the end of it and I stood up without the puppet. You start feeling a bit naked because you don't have this adorable little puppet on your. He was adorable. He was friendly. He laughed. He could be quirky and cheeky. All those things that
he was naughty as well.
Yeah, he was naughty. I'm no Rod Hull with an emu, but you can get away with so much when it's not me, it's him. It's the other guy. I'm just here. I'm just standing. I'm just providing support. But yeah, it's when you actually stand up at the end and you go, "Wow, that was an adventure." And genuinely, you come to the end of it and you go, "Yeah, I'm a human again. I'm a real boy." Yeah, it's a profound. I don't know where else I would have got quite such a unique thing. And obviously, the puppet itself was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I sometimes tell the story of where it really arrived. I was on stage, having an in-depth discussion, and I completely fluffed the line. And without me interacting with him at all, just Pinocchio turned to the audience, gave a bit of a shrug, turned back to Jenny, who was opposite me, and we delivered the line again. I wasn't involved in that. Poor Jenny nearly had a heart attack. He fell over right there. But yeah, that's the bit where you go, it's working. This is really a thing. It's not just me with a piece of fabric. It's a character. We are a character.
Wow, that's quite a journey, and a very difficult one by the sounds of it as well.
Well, it's if it was easy, everyone would do it, as they say.
Famous words. I mean, speaking of easy, Chris, as Geppetto, I mean, how easy, how hard was it for you to act opposite a puppet? And a puppeteer?
To be fair, to start with, it was incredibly hard because I had to get out of the habit of talking to Matt. Because obviously once the puppet was there, I was talking to something in front of Matt. So I had to very quickly sort of get away from and almost talking to his arm. He went through the rehearsals because we didn't actually have the puppet until after a few weeks rehearsals, bless them. But so yeah, as Matt was holding his arm out and I was trying to make sure I was in front of him talking to the arm rather than talking to Matt. There was a little bit of experience there. I mean, I didn't have much interaction with it, but we had done something similar with Beauty and the Beast with an arm puppet. So I had sort of seen it in action before, how that was going to work. So that did help a little bit. But as time went on, it just became quite natural to ignore Matt and just talk to the puppet, which was, just shows the good interaction that was going on between the pair of us, I think, really. And I think the audience could see that I was talking to the puppet, not to Matt. And I think it works well. And like Matt says, having seen Avenue Q a few times, you can see how that works. That you have to get ahead of the person and react with the puppet and not the puppeteer.
Yeah, it is one of the weirdest things to do. I'm 6'1" and fairly obvious, and having to disappear into the background is quite a trick.
Yeah.
Especially in a bright red costume.
Bright red costume as
Yes.
well, yeah.
Yeah, I swear somebody in the costume design had it in for me specifically. My name is Matt Black for a reason. I don't wear colours, and then suddenly I'm on stage in blue, red, and yellow. And I think
For weeks.
it was much the same. Somehow when I was doing Tweedledee for Alice, I was dressed in the brightest colours imaginable.
I mean, actually, Dario, coming in there, I mean, talking about puppetry and stuff like that, what is the thinking there because they do it in similar in Avenue Q, to dress the puppeteer the same as the puppet? Is it never considered to put the puppeteer in black so they blank out, if you like?
Yeah, that is the other way of doing it. I think because we knew the ending of the play would be that the puppet was taken off of Matt's arm and then he stands there in the same costume and it's I'm a Real Boy. I think we thought it would have been a bit too weird to have him in black for some scenes and then the full costume. We did it with actually it was the same with Beauty and the Beast, and I think that was Erica had a very strong theory that as long as the puppeteering is convincing, it doesn't matter what the actor is wearing, you will forgive anything. But it is an extension of the puppet is an extension of the actor who stood there, so they're in the full costume, you're just ignoring their face. And it is incredible how quickly that happens once the puppet's there and finished and the performance is spot on. I mean, it's still that. Well, all the puppets have been brilliant, but that Pinocchio one is another level from John and Angela, the puppet makers.
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of one of Queen's Park's prized possessions. It's still up there in the cupboard.
He's really creepy when the boxes, if he's in a box, and sometimes when boxes go up and down, occasionally you walk past and you're like, oh, there he is, because you're like, oh.
Yeah,
he was on stage again recently, I believe.
Yeah,
he was with all the puppets got an airing at the funny voices.
Yeah, there's very definitely that kind of uncanny valley, and yeah, I mean, even as a performer, there's it's a lump of fabric up until you kind of put him on. It's a very weird thing where something suddenly becomes alive or dead depending on whether it's in a box or not. It's Schrodinger's character.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
So, I mean, those were some real highlights of the kind of puppeteering and the interactions that you had. Were there any other really great things that stood out for you during the show? Any memories like the infamous snow day?
I think playing broccoli. I loved playing broccoli so much, and it was just one line, and also it was just such a good joke. It was such a good joke that I got to come on, and because I think it was just sort of like, does anyone just want to be the broccoli? And I was like, yes, I want to be the broccoli. And you just come on, you're like, why does nobody love me? And then like run off, because you get to be like so over the top. But yeah, plain broccoli, loved it. But also on the snow day was the cutest moment I've ever seen in my life, was all the kids' wellies and shoes in a line at the front door. Because all those that had actually made it, I think they pretty much all of them took off their wellies at the front door, and there was just this line of tiny kids' shoes at the front door, and I just was like, oh, and it was just the cutest thing I've ever seen. And yeah, because that was cold. Because part of my costume, and it genuinely is, second favourite costume after Alice's, but I love that costume so much. But it did require fishnets, and it was cold. And I remember so often I'd just walk up to Dario and be like, "Can I wear my leggings, please? It's too cold for fishnets."
Aw.
I have to say, with the character, when I was cast as Geppetto, I mean, I know we don't reference Disney because obviously the legalities of it, but Geppetto is recognised as a sort of an old man with lots of beard and hair. So I thought, I'm going to do this.
Oh, yeah.
So for 3 months, I said, that's it, right, hair growing and beard. And I was getting all sorts of comments from people at work as it was getting longer and longer. But it was so nice to actually sort of be in the real sort of full character mode. I mean, it didn't require makeup and stuff to some extent. But the lovely part of it was that as we do this interaction with the audience as they're leaving, I used to go out and just sit at the front because I was the old man. I needed to sit down. And the kids were coming up to me like I was Father Christmas. And it was just so nice there. You could see them sort of talking to me, and I was asking about what they were going to do for Christmas, or as it was afterwards, and how their Christmas was. And it was almost their faces were like I was another Father Christmas type character. I mean, I wasn't trying to be, but it was just a lovely interaction with the children. It was just about to sit there, and I think I was photographed more then than sort of dames and stuff like that. But no, that was great. And as for the snow day, I mean, I only lived a couple of miles from the theatre, and I got a phone call. Are you going to turn up? Of course I'm going to turn up. Well, if I have to walk there, of course I'm going to turn up. And as I did walk there, and it was great that those members of the audience did get there, and cast were out clearing the pathway through the car park. So yeah, it was all part of the fun, really, isn't it?
It was one of like a really great audience as well, because I think we all knew what we'd done to get there. And like it just was really lovely. And because I remember I walked, but I didn't own any sensible shoes, so I had to walk in my boyfriend's shoes. He's like a size 14 and I'm a 6, and there's a picture of me leaving, and I've got like my Christmas hat on, and I didn't own a coat, so I had my boyfriend's hoodie that went down to my knees, and these massive shoes just to waddle my way to the theatre. But there definitely was a really lovely feeling of that show, just because it was just really nice.
Yeah, the show must go on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
The
well,
embodiment of it.
Yeah, because wasn't that one where you ended up filling in?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
We lost Doherty because he was in Wickham, wasn't he?
I think
Yeah.
most of us
that's
made
right,
it in,
yes,
but
of course.
but
I
there
think
was-
everyone made it. I think we got all the dancers and all the cast, but Matt was in High Wycombe and relied on public transport. And I think there was some discussion about could we try and send a car to get him, and then we thought, well, we've got no one to spare. So if someone goes and gets stuck, that means we're 2 people down. So eventually we did have to. He was the town crier that year.
Yes, he was.
So that was one of Lara's many. I mean, that was very last minute.
That was.
You've got an hour.
Yeah, that was. You've got an hour. Like, if you can learn the lines, great. If not, don't worry about it. Here's a script.
Matt never did so.
Yeah,
Don't worry about
I
it.
think those were the exact words used, actually.
And the entire cast was stunned when they got the correct cue line.
Yeah, and I went in, and I, as far as I know, I did all the lines without a script. And yeah, I think there was a surprise that the correct lines came through.
It was a much quicker show.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, much quicker. I'm wearing a costume that was about 4 sizes too big for me. So yeah, it sounds like we've all got quite a few stories from various shows. And of course, Pinocchio was the first time that the unbound storyteller was seen by the audience. So, Dario, can you tell us a bit about that character's origins and what the hopes are for the storyteller going forward?
Yeah, so that was the first time she was in Pinocchio because we needed a narrator style character, and that kind of classical image of the fireside storyteller seemed to fit very well with the show, with filling in the backstory about Geppetto's wife and how Pinocchio became a living puppet. So we had it that she's a travelling storyteller who comes in and tells all of the dancers who are playing the villages, gives them this story about the how Pinocchio came to be. And so I remember when we were, during the production process, Elaine, our costume designer, was designing this coat. It was like a patchwork coat for Joe Wright, who played the storyteller on that occasion. And I remember her mentioning this idea that she could design a coat that any actor could wear and then take on the role of the storyteller when they wore it. So not for panto per se, but as a figurehead for Unbound, in a sense, a sort of literal icon, this image who could pop up anywhere, and people would say, "Oh, that's the Unbound storyteller." And I loved the idea, and we thought it was fantastic. We thought, we'll do this, but it was one of those ones that tends to end up on the we're going to do that one day pile, and it took a while to get off the ground because we were so frantically busy for the next sort of year in 2018. But we brought the character back, played by Erica and then Gareth, for WizFizz Fest, which used to be called the Roald Dahl Festival, which happens in Aylesbury every year, and that was in 2019. We ran a writing competition and then turned the winning entries into these sort of Jackanory style videos, and Erica and Gareth were the narrators. So it started gathering pace, and then COVID happened, so that put it on hold again.
Yep.
So that was another sort of 6 months later. Then we finally got round. Weirdly, actually, COVID gave us the chance to work on it and build up to doing it. So weirdly, COVID was the making of that project. And we finally launched it this year. So we're kind of building on the fact that we had 3 different actors playing the storyteller in these 2 different projects. The whole idea is that anyone could be an Unbound storyteller, and they can go out to the community. They could go to different venues or live events that we go to representing Queen's Park and Unbound, and can tell stories, whether that's stuff that's been commissioned specifically for a themed event, or just going out with our big book of stories and offering people which one do you want to hear, or in the case of WizFizz Fest this year, improvising completely new ones and chatting to members of the public. So it's lovely because it really celebrates that fireside tradition of stories that are told time and time again, but never the same way twice. And the fantastic thing is that we've got this whole community of actors now who are kind of ready and raring to go as storytellers, and we've got the opportunity to train up new people as well. So it's becoming a little bit of a legacy project really for Unbound, is this long-term thing to have a group of actors, a group of performers who are the storytellers, who can go out to any venue, any event, wherever they're needed, and are a sort of recognisable symbol of storytelling that links back to Queen's Park. So yeah, high hopes for it, and we've got lots of stuff planned for this summer, different events we're going out to, and training program starts in the autumn, so hopefully there'll be more storytellers by the end of the year. And yeah, exciting times ahead.
Wow, that really sounds like the embodiment of tell great stories, really. Kind of walking motto. Well, I think we're sort of coming towards the end now, but every panto ends on a song, of course. So what is your favourite song from Unbound's pantomimes? That's a question to everyone.
I think the fact the lobster quadrille still gets stuck in my head says
That
something.
is a good one.
Like,
yeah.
That was the one that, as we were learning it, I'd be walking down the corridor, just going, and one of the kids would be like, "Miss," and I'm like, "I can't help it, it's there." And you kind of like, all the other panto songs, I remember how much they get stuck in your head, and then eventually they'll go. But Lobster Quadrille, I still catch myself now while I'm staring at tea, and I'm like, this, it just never leaves. Ever.
That was one of my favourites to pitch, because obviously the lyrics are in the book of Alice in Wonderland, of the Lobster Quadrille. It's the Mock Turtle song, I think it's called. And we were always looking for different things that the dancers could do, and we thought, oh, tap dancing is one we haven't really done before. And I was reading through Alice and I thought, tap dancing lobsters, that's genius. I remember pitching that to the dance school, and the principal looking at me as if I had finally gone mad. But it was really good. They had castanets.
They were brilliant.
I guess for me, it'd probably be the Beauty and the Beast, our Les Mis tribute, if you like. I mean, I can't remember exactly what the song was called, Dario, what the title was, but
Oh, it's called The Last Day or something, I think.
yeah, it was, wasn't it? But it was pretty much a sort of Les Mis barricade moment. We had people coming on singing individual lines. We had a flag waving at the back, and it was it was all for Erica really. But it was just a lovely sort of moment as we all sort of collectively came and produced this big crescendo of noise at the end of the song. So, but yeah, it was fun to be in.
Yeah, I have to say I'd love to say that my favourite song was the one I did as Merlin, but I hated that because I could never get all the words in because a cinch, a pinch, a dish of this, and I remember being shouted at by a director because I'd been working at it for weeks. But yeah, to be honest, very few people have ever accused me of being egotistical, but my favourite panto song from any of the Unbound productions is actually Song of the Seasons from The Snow Queen.
Yeah, that's my favourite too.
Which I had the privilege of actually composing the music for, and mostly it's because it's a very, very simple song, stripped it right back, and it does exactly what it needs to do at exactly the right time in the production, and it just creates a wonderful piece of atmosphere, and it's incredibly simple. And I'm like I say, I know I wrote it, but it's still one of my favourite pieces that I've ever written.
Yeah, it is. That's the one I have in my head still. I still find myself humming that one because I think it is a beautiful melody.
Yeah.
It is one of the very few times, because I end up writing the lyrics for panto, which is a bit scary because I'm not a lyricist. And I'm always slightly shocked and appalled when I hear the songs and find out that the composers have actually used my lyrics instead of changing them. So I always write on the front of the script, just change what you need to. It's just a guideline. And then they use them, and I go, oh no, that's dreadful. Having said that, again, not to end on backstabbing, but that is the one I'm really proud of as a set of lyrics. As it sums the show up really well. But yeah, and it was a very sweet note to end on.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you all for your thoughts and memories, and thank you to everyone for listening in. For more episodes of Tell Great Stories and lots of other great audio and video content, head over to unboundtheatre.co.uk or look up at Unbound Theatre on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram or SoundCloud.